It has been an entire year now since my favorite season of RuPaul's Drag Race has ended. And since then, we've gotten an entirely new season of All Stars that's come and gone, which, while I did love it, it felt like it was missing just something. Something was holding it back from being a perfect season. And instead, it remained just a great season in my eyes. So I went back, I rewatched All Star 6, and everything became very clear. All-Star 6 is truly the season of redemptions. The amount of story arcs we get from the queens is insane. Comparing to All-Star 7, I would say the only queens with a real arc over that season are Monet, Trinity, somewhat Jinx. Other than that, we just see the queens competing and having fun, which is great, but there wasn't much going on under the surface. All-Star 6, you have 5 more queens than they did on All-Star 7, but they managed to give almost all of them some kind of overarching storyline. But unlike the other seasons of the show, where a lot of the storytelling can feel heavy-handed and forced, everything on this season felt incredibly real, nuanced, and warranted in the narrative. The 3 things I really think made the season what it was is the storytelling, the determination of all of the queens themselves, and the caliber of drag. All 3 of these aspects were firing on all cylinders from basically the second the first queen enters the workroom in episode 1. When the cast was discovered once filming had began, a lot of people were very skeptical about the season. I mean, just looking at the breakdown, only 4 of them had ever really been finalists on their seasons. 4 of them were pretty heavily disliked by the fandom at the time, and 8 of them had never even won a challenge before. Saying this cast was risky to go forward with was more than fair, and I think fans were rightfully a little skeptical about how it would all turn out. But the reason the cast worked so well is because of how much they wanted to be there and prove themselves and get their redemption. All-Stars 5, which was the season that immediately preceded All-Stars 6, was very heavily critiqued by most fans. From lazy challenges to a top-heavy cast and a flop of a new twist, it really felt like the franchise was starting to ring it in a little bit. And then 2 queens basically quit. It felt like All-Stars was losing its way. It was losing what made it so epic and grand in the first couple of iterations. So for this new era on Paramount Plus, producers took some risks, and that all paid off. Casting queens like Kylie Sonique Love, who was an early out on a season that aired well over a decade ago, or Raja O'Hara, who fans almost universally despised on her original season, and who also had spent most of her time on the show in the bottom 2, or even bringing back Jan so quickly after her season ended. All of these were risks, but damn did they pay off. I want this video to be a love letter to All-Star 6, and there's another one of my favorite Drag Race YouTubers who also loves this season, and I guess now YouTube collabs are made in the Twitter circle. So great minds think alike. We were both going to make a video about All-Star 6, and so instead we decided to unite our forces, and without further ado, I'd like to introduce JackFed, who is going to discuss some of his favorite aspects of All-Stars 6.
Hey guys, it's Jack. So where do I start out with All-Star 6 that I haven't already raved about before? I think a great place to start is with the challenges of the season because though most of them are pretty standard, they all come together very nicely and are at the top of the game for these specific challenges. Take the variety show for example, which has been a staple since All-Stars 2, but here still feels really fresh. This was the first All-Star season to have 13 queens on it, so it seems like they would have to rush through the talent show, but the pacing was so great. On top of that, even though there were a lot of bitch tracks this time around, they tried to split it up with various talents in between them. Other challenges like Side Hustles and Show Up Queen were again pretty standard, but they were still some of the top tier. This is partially due to the raw talent of the girls, but it also involves small choices made by production. Allowing the queens to storyboard and give them ample time to film in Side Hustles, or making Show Up Queen a single song just divided between the 2 teams, serve as a way to freshen up the format that may be getting stale to some viewers. And this isn't even mentioning one of my favorite challenges of all time, the Hall of Fame halftime show. This specific challenge is such a creative idea for a musical that can't really be done again. All of the queens did so insanely well, and they got some of the best music producers for this challenge. Outside of maybe Ginger as Fergie, if you played me any other one of these parodies, I could pick out the artist without even looking at them. And again, it comes back to these small details where I feel like they've learned from their mistakes and want to improve for the future. Outside of the halftime, yes, they did play it safe for the challenges, but the small details were changed in order to freshen it up. And if we're talking about learning from their mistakes in order to create better TV, let's talk about the Lip Sync Assassin format. All Stars 5 was a little bit of a rough time for this format because I feel like some of the assassins weren't given songs that really suited them. The biggest example, of course, is Kennedy Davenport being given a country ballad, which does not fit her at all. And the way they fixed this in All Star 6, of course, is to just give the queens the songs that would suit them. Give a really campy song to Mayhem, a pop powerhouse song to Laganja. It really just seems like they wanted the Lip Sync Assassins to be at their A-game this season, and they gave them the best songs for that. And though, yes, there were a lot of coincidences of which assassin came in at which time, people like Brooke coming into lip sync against Raja, or Jessica coming in to eliminate Yara, everything was just a little too coincidental, but you cannot deny it was so entertaining each time. And then we get to the voting around this format that I think was just handled a lot better here. The storytelling from episode to episode to keep us invested in questioning who's going to be eliminated is some of the best television I've seen. Where All Stars 5 was predictable with the eliminations and who people were going to vote for each week, All Star 6 at least tries to keep it up in the air up until the end. A really great example is in episode 2 where we're not sure if it's going to be Yara or Jiggly eliminated. With how All Stars worked in the past, the more obvious choice would be to eliminate Jiggly because her track record is worse and Yara is coming off of a win. But at the top of the episode, it's shown that Yara is playing more of a wild card game and also was annoying the queens in the workroom throughout the episode. So now we have this dilemma of keeping a queen with a worse track record or keeping a queen who's a wild card and could eliminate anyone. And outside of a Curia and maybe Pandora, every single episode is like this and we really don't know where people's votes lie. It is such great storytelling and they really use this format to its full potential. All-Star 6 was such a great era for the show and it proves that anyone can be an all-star, they just need to run the show correctly. I'll stand by that. I think it's one of the best all-star seasons, maybe even the best all-star season, and that's basically all I have to say. Thank you so much for having me on.
So now for my portion of the video, I want to break down the storytelling of the season because I truly think this is Drag Race at its absolute best. We got so much out of all of the queens, and I really think it's worth highlighting and dissecting. So let's start with the first queen of the season to go home, Miss Serena Chacha. When I saw Serena was on the season, I was truly dumbfounded. I mean, a queen from almost a decade ago who was on 2 episodes, was in the bottom for both of them, and who all the other queens hated because she was so young, naive, and, you know, for lack of a better word, annoying. What was Drag Race thinking? Well, they were thinking many steps ahead of me, obviously. I do think Serena was cast to go home first. As we saw, she wasn't even the worst in this first challenge, and she still went home. But by bringing on a queen who is mostly remembered as a meme, letting her have a moment back in the spotlight to show what she's learned and how she's grown, it gives a buffer episode where everyone else gets to move on, but the first queen to go home still gains more than she loses. Seeing queens like Coco, Pandora, Morgan, and Derek be first outs on their respective All-Star seasons was always really hard to see. And it's hard to say that queens like Coco and Pandora especially didn't take a slight hit in their careers at the time from that. By casting someone like Serena Chacha, who you can send home first, but it'll still be a net gain for her. She gets to promote her wig business. She gets to show she's grown as a person from kind of the immature 21-year-old that she was on season 5. And she gets to show how much her drag has improved. Despite being the first to go home, she really gets a good edit in this first episode, with the other queens telling her that she deserves to be there and really had shown such growth since her first season. She shows she's not a bratty kid anymore and bows out looking absolutely stunning. I'm going to dip in and out of talking about the Redemption Lip Sync SmackDown episode, which I think was really the greatest way to do a comeback challenge the show has ever done. In that episode, Serena gets to wear another absolutely stunning look. She gets to give the best lip sync she's ever given on the show, and again, show she's just a good-ass drag queen. The second queen to go home is Jiggly Caliente, and much like Milk and Trixie Mattel on All Stars 3, she was a great example of how maybe not slaying Drag Race doesn't mean you can't find success elsewhere. Jiggly was a mid-out on season 4 who never truly excelled much at the challenges, but since then, she's been on a talk show, she's been on Pose. We see now since All Star 6, she's a judge on Drag Race Philippines. And the show really highlights her accomplishments outside of the show. It highlights her journey as a trans woman. It lets her just be the fun and shady icon that she is in the confessional. Jiggly's story arc is kind of used as a prop for Ginger's, but her elimination is framed as a big line in the sand for how the queens are going to be voting this season. Ginger and Jiggly's close friendship is shown in the first episode and continued to be highlighted in episode 2 as she struggles with her Achilles heel sewing. On other seasons, we usually make fun of the queen who doesn't know how to sew and say it's her fault for not learning, but here it's framed a little bit differently. We see Jiggly in a more sympathetic light because she talks about how she's tried to learn many times, but she just can't get the hang of it. It's something she's just not good at. So when she's in the bottom 2, we see her fighting and clawing to stay, especially in Untucked. She's begging Ginger not to vote for her, and in the end, she goes home almost unanimously, with Ginger not voting to save her friend, despite saying she wanted to vote with integrity. Now, this word integrity comes up a lot in this season, with queens having different interpretations of what it means in the context of this format. But what's made very clear, especially from the edit in Untucked, Ginger voting to send Jiggly home is not a move with integrity. And Jiggly's elimination is the first strike against Ginger's narrative. Now, I cannot wait to talk about Ginger Minj later. Her, Trinity, K. Bonet, and Jan, I think, have the most complex and interesting edits and story arcs on this season. But for now, we're going to skip over Silky Nutmeg Ganache. We're going to talk about the fourth queen to sashay away, Yara Sofia. Now, Yara is one of my all-time favorite queens to ever be on this franchise. So I was both so happy to see her back, but also so gutted to see her go home so soon. Yara actually has a really good run despite it being so short. She wins the first episode, and she's in the top team of the week in the third episode. But due to her story arc, I think she gets an unfair placement in episode 2, which also turns out to be her killing blow later on. Yara is a very zany, wild personality, and for her first 2 appearances on the show, she was portrayed as like the lovable weirdo. This time around, she definitely is portrayed as a little more villainous and annoying. We get a lot of moments of the other queens being clearly annoyed with her workroom antics and her attitude, and all of this is just little breadcrumbs on the trail to the justification for her elimination. We see in both the episodes that she is in the bottom that she acts overly confident, even somewhat cocky in her abilities to perform. In episode 2, the blue ball, she doesn't even start sewing her ball look until way later, just because she knows she can throw something together in 20 minutes. And it's definitely kind of portrayed as an intimidation tactic. And, riding high from her first win in the previous episode, the narrative tells us that she's acting foolish and somewhat unjustly put her in the bottom as her comeuppance. She survives, but when is given the halftime show challenge where she is going to be performing as Shakira, she gets cocky yet again, saying she does this at her shows all the time. She knows she's going to kill it. She knows the choreo she wants to do. She doesn't even want to listen to the choreographer. And the narrative is eager to knock her on her ass yet again. And she justly, I think this time, is put into the bottom. Despite having 2 top placements and the queen next to her, Curia, having 2 other bottom placements, Yara is sent home. Now, producers were smart to put Curia in the bottom here, since despite her having a worse track record, she actually did a great job in this episode. Fans, and I'm sure the queens themselves, were very confused to see her in the bottom here. And it makes voting for Yara a little bit more justifiable, since she did do badly in this episode, despite having a better track record than Curia. Yara is sent home, and it seems like the one queen that just couldn't get along with the group is now out. Scarlet Envy is the next queen to go home, and I think of all the queens on this cast, she gets sidelined the most, both in the edit and in the critiques. She gives 3 stellar performances in the variety show, the Blue Ball, and the halftime show, and she gets no love from the judges for any of them. I mean, her track record is safe, eliminated. And this just goes to show that looking at track record is not an accurate way to determine how a queen did on a season. Because up until her elimination episode, Scarlet was one of the most consistent performing queens on this season. Scarlet really doesn't have any storyline on this season. She has some fun, shady confessionals, but she really doesn't get much screen time until episode 5. The episode opens with her saying she's sick of being safe and she just wants to stand out, which is the kiss of death in a modern season of Drag Race. And the rest of the episode, we follow her plan to stand out. First, she fights for the subject that she really wants in Pink Table Talks. Then, she airs her worries for Kylie being the moderator on their team, which causes some slight tension. She acts a little try-hard in the challenge and is reprimanded very harshly by the judges, being thrown into the bottom and sent home by Ginger Minj. Again, can't wait to discuss Ginger. But I don't think necessarily Scarlet deserved to be in the bottom this episode, but losing the queen with little to no storyline in an episode where the storyline somewhat justifies it makes a lot more sense than losing potentially like Pandora or Jan or Kylie. I'm not sure why production didn't jump at the opportunity to highlight Scarlet the second she slayed that variety show, especially since fans were obsessed with her after they deemed her, being a premature exit on season 11. Plus, she had a ton of storyline options with other queens from her season, like Silky and Raja, that really didn't go anywhere. Not everyone can get the same amount of screen time. It's just not possible. And unfortunately, Scarlet was one of the 2 queens who I think really lacked in this season. Next out is Curia Chanel Davenport, and I'm not even sure she necessarily has an arc, but I definitely think she has a redemption. Despite doing pretty well on season 11, she won 2 challenges, she made it to top 4. We didn't get to learn a lot about her or see her personality much. She was portrayed as the perfect pageant queen, but we didn't get to see much beyond that, which led to her not getting much fan support in the finale, especially when the 3 other queens there were the 3 main characters of that season. This time around, we see Curia struggle. And when a queen struggles, it's a great way to get to know them better. We see their emotion, their frustration, their determination to bounce back, and we get so much of that from Curia, as well as learning more about her life. We get so many new sides of Curia on the season, and by the time it's her turn to sashay away, a lot of people were extremely sad to see her go, when going into this season, I think a lot of people already wrote her off. It was really good to see that upward trajectory for her with the fan base, even if it meant she wasn't dominating this season. Jan is the next one to go home, and damn, she has one of my favorite multi-season arcs the show has ever given us. I'm not going to go into it super in depth because I did an entire video on it, which is right here in the right corner if you want to check that out. But Jan struggling with finding what the judges want from her, her desperation to succeed, and just how hard she is on herself were amazing television, even if we're being entertained by someone's misery. Despite 2 great performances in episodes 1 and 2, she's just safe. Then they put her into the bottom in episode 3, and we start to see her unravel a little bit. She finally gets her musical redemption in episode 4, only to then be the worst of the week in episode 5 and narrowly escape being sent home. At this point, she is really starting to let everything affect her. But she gets one more solid week in the top during the acting challenge, only to then go home on the girl group challenge, despite her literally being in a girl group. It's quite the journey with lots of highs and lows, and I go into the nuance and the specifics in the video that I mentioned, but yeah, one of the best story arcs this show has ever seen that culminates in the most shocking elimination of the season. Now, Pandora Box is the other queen that I don't think gets a storyline or much of a redemption arc. She goes home next, and it kind of feels like it was overdue. Despite a strong start to the season, she kind of starts flatlining, either being in the middle of the pack or one of the weaker of the week as the season progresses. For an iconic queen, beloved by the fandom, and in desperate need for a redemption after All Stars 1, it was sad that that didn't come to fruition for her. She barely makes the edit in a lot of episodes, which she was upset about on Twitter. And I think it's because without a real redemption storyline, no villain arc, no underdog arc, there's really not much to do with her. It was good that Pandy gets reintroduced to the newer fans, but I just wish there was more for them to take away from her. We see her struggle the most in this competition when she needed to be honest about her struggles and her insecurities, which was in both the Table Talk Challenge and the Show Up Queen Challenge. I think she just loses confidence because of this, and unfortunately she flops the challenge we were all most excited to see her take on, which was the Snatch Game. It's just unfortunate, but not every single queen can have a redemption, and I'm just still sad Pandora was not one of them. It's at this point the SmackDown redemption comes, and with it comes one of the best redemption arcs the show has ever seen, which is Silky Nutmeg Ganache. Silky was very heavily disliked during and after season 11. She played the Roxy to Evie's Jinx on that season, and I was actually surprised to see her return to the show so soon as she did, especially with the reception that she got. What we saw in her first 3 episodes was a very subdued Silky. The fun, bombastic character from season 11 was gone, and instead we barely see her in the edit or in the workroom. It isn't until the 3rd episode that we learn this is because she's trying to course correct, basically. She doesn't want to be that same person that was deemed unlikable by fans on season 11, so she was holding back. And that holding back is exactly what led to her elimination in episode 3. Her elimination was so sad under these circumstances, and it really showed the negative effects the fandom can have on these queens and their careers. Luckily, this was not the end of her story, though. Just the catalyst for her true redemption moment, the SmackDown. Silky dominated 6 lip syncs in a row in the SmackDown. Her determination to earn her spot back is very evident from her making props, planning reveals, having gaggy moments for every single lip sync she participated in. While her competitors bring, cute looks and, some fun performances, she brings entire moments. And that fire and spark we saw in season 11 was finally back, and this time the fans were fully ready to embrace it. But for an hour, we watched Silky demolish half this cast, give so many iconic moments, from making a drink out of the contents of her bra, smash a guitar, do flag twirling, splits, death drops, gender-bending floor rolls. She truly brings everything to this episode. And when she is finally defeated by Eureka O'Hara due to a wardrobe malfunction, it's absolutely heartbreaking to watch. And that's what I love most about this season. Even an early out like Silky gets an entire episode where she gets to show off her skills, get a redemption both for herself and in the eyes of the fandom. You don't get that on any other season. Perhaps the biggest redemption of the entire season, though, belongs to Trinity K. Bonet. Her elimination at the top 5 after believing she made it to top 4 is both so heartbreaking you want to turn off the TV, but then a reminder of just how much the show makes you care about the queens. Trinity had been clamoring to come back to All Stars for years, so to see her finally get her shot and make the absolute most of it was amazing to watch. I've said this before, on most other seasons, Trinity would have been the villain of this season. We see her go through her feels. She wasn't always the nicest in the room and was always down to speak her mind both to the queens and in the confessional. But instead of highlighting these, less congenial moments and giving her a villain edit, we get to see Trinity as a fully rounded person who feels a lot of things, goes through them, and comes out the other side. She might have a moment where she calls someone out or is acting a little bit difficult, but the narrative doesn't portray this as bad, instead portraying it as normal, healthy, and what makes Trinity so intriguing. She's not putting on a front. She's not putting on any kind of facade for the cameras. She is being 100% real. And in modern Drag Race, we don't get to see that as often as I think people think they do. In a lot of ways, Trinity is the main character of the season. From the first episode, being in the bottom, worrying that she isn't good enough, and worrying that she doesn't have the relationships to carry her through the competition, to staying, getting that validation from her sisters, winning the third episode, forming very close bonds with queens like Eureka and Raja and Curia, to then redeeming moments from season 6, like her Beyonce performance, the rap challenge, showing so much personal growth in the table talks and monologues challenge. Very rarely do we get to see such an in-depth and interesting edit for a queen on this show, and audiences ate it up. I think Trinity allowed queens like Betty and Jasmine Kennedy to get the edits that they got on season 14, when they could have just been edited as one-dimensional villains. The moment where Trinity breaks down after realizing that she's going to be going home, and after all the fighting she did to get there, doing so well in the challenges, clawing her way to the top, to realize that this wasn't her time and this wasn't going to be her moment, it's one of the saddest Drag Race moments in history. And we don't feel that hurt unless the show took the time to make us truly care about this queen, which it did, and I applaud them for it. As for the final four, let's start with Eureka, since she has the most cut and dry edit. Eureka didn't need to redeem anything competition-wise. We know she's a fierce-ass queen, but she did need to redeem her personality to the audience. History has not been good to Eureka on season 10, and as further we get away from it, the more people tend to side with the vixen. Eureka, after seasons 9 and 10, kind of came off as a queen who seeks attention, whether it be positive or negative, and has to be the loudest voice in the room. Her edit on both of those seasons kind of pounds that into our skulls. But Eureka on All-Star 6 was an entirely different person. She was there for her sisters, she let them speak, she wasn't trying to start fights every episode, and you could tell she truly matured in between her seasons. She 1000% got the redemption that was necessary for her arc on this series to feel complete. Her being the returning queen just makes sense too. Then to come back and win the final challenge, it was an eerie parallel to her leaving season 9, and then being the comeback queen on season 10, where she slayed that entire season. As for Raja and Kylie, what an amazing redemption for them both. I think Kylie had been mostly forgotten by the fandom until she came back for the Christmas special, which she devoured. And really, that was the stepping stone for her absolute slayage of All-Stars 6. Despite having some bottom placements, Kylie didn't bomb a single challenge. Her story arc throughout the season was about how everyone told her she was too quiet. This came off in the commercial challenge, in the Pink Table Talks challenge, the second which landed her in the bottom. Kylie is then immediately thrown into a do-or-die moment the following week, where she has to portray Jessica Lange in the American Horror Story Challenge. Despite starting a little bit small, she gets a push from Michelle and realizes this is her moment. She slays the performance, wins her first challenge ever, and then begins her slayage of the rest of the season. She does so well in the Show Up Queen challenge, the Snatch Game, the monologues, and especially in the finale, where her incredible verse, paired with her slip save in the lip sync, won her the season. Kylie is why an early out queen deserves a shot on All Stars, because if they wanted enough and they have the talent to back it up like Kylie does, they can truly kill a season. And I don't think 5 years ago any of us would have predicted Kylie to be an All-Stars winner, but I'm so happy we live in a world where she does. As for Raja, very few queens have gotten the hatred that Raja O'Hara did after season 11. She got one of the harshest villain edits we have ever seen. and she'll even tell you herself that it was warranted. But after some soul searching and some TV money, she came back with a vengeance. Behind all that anger on season 11 was a lot of talent, and she really let that show all throughout All Stars 6. Amazing runways, challenge prowess, and consistency we rarely ever see, and a closer look into who she is as a person, which all of this led to her being the fan favorite along with Trinity of this season. I don't think we have ever seen such a drastic shift in hatred to being beloved as quickly and intensely as we did with Raja. Production could have pulled what they did with Jeremy on All Stars 2 and pushed for that villain arc to continue, but instead, they saw the growth in Raja and allowed that to be the narrative instead. And then there is Ginger Minj. Some seasons are stories about why the winner won, but I feel like the story of this season is more of why Ginger lost. From episode 2, where the edit very clearly paints Ginger in the wrong after what she did to Jiggly, Ginger is the one who starts the dialogue about integrity, and the edit tells us that voting to keep her friend would have been the right thing to do. Whether we believe that or not, that is what the edit is telling us. And I found that weird, since we see the queens vote their friends off all the time. Then she is thrown into the bottom and dragged for her runway look the very next episode. And the one thing that Ginger had to redeem is her runways. We see so many of her looks get dragged. Especially, I wanted to highlight her dance costume in the Show Up Queen challenge. So many times we don't even hear critiques on what the queens wear in the challenges, because, like, who cares? But Ginger's look was specifically highlighted as terrible by both Michelle and Carson. Next, the edit undermines her when she keeps Jan over Scarlet in the Table Talks episode. Her friendship with Jan is highlighted throughout the season beforehand, and many reasons are given for why Jan deserves to go home here. Despite Ginger doing what she didn't do with Jiggly earlier in the season, her saving Jan here is edited to be shady. The edit undermines her in a way that it doesn't with anybody else. When Trinity chooses Yada to go home in the ball, we get to hear her explanation and then we move on. We don't get that with Ginger's decisions. By the time the finale came, Kylie, Raja, and even Eureka had a lot of storylines and growth in their edits. Ginger had nothing. Ginger was definitely used as a platform to discuss strategy and integrity when it came to the format of the season, but her storyline was much thinner than most of the other queens, and the one thing she needed to redeem, it was made very clear in the critiques that she didn't. And I want to be clear, I've been talking about the edits and how these queens are portrayed, but that is only a tiny fraction of how these queens are as humans. We can talk about their portrayals on TV all day long, but this isn't going to give us a perfect picture of who they are as people in their everyday lives. I would say out of these 13 queens, everyone got a redemption in one form or another, except for Yada and Pandora. Scarlet got one because of the viewers, not because of the edit. And because of that, I think this is such a good season. It props the queens up instead of dragging them down. It lets us see them as fully rounded individuals, not one-dimensional edits. And I really, really hope that All Stars 8 takes this same direction. We have kind of the same cast with some unexpected early outs and some queens that, didn't get the best perception on their season. And I really hope that they just take this same kind of direction with All Stars 8 because it worked so well on All Star 6 and so many queens that I'm not sure where their careers would have been without this season are flourishing. I mean, Raja, Silky, Curia, Scarlet, I feel like they are all better off because of the season. And obviously queens like Kylie. Well, I think that is long enough to rant and rave about what is my favorite season of Drag Race. I want to know, what are your thoughts on All-Star 6? And what is your favorite season? I'm expecting to hear a lot of Season 6. I'm expecting to hear a lot of All-Stars 2. And those are very valid answers. For me, this one reigns supreme. Thank you so much, Jack, for being here. You know you are one of my favorite YouTubers, and if you are not watching Jack's channel, you are missing out on one of the best Drag Race channels on all of YouTube, so go check him out as well. As always, I want to thank you guys so much for watching. If you feel like it, maybe you could subscribe, get me a little bit closer to 50K, and if you already are subscribed, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Here are the links to all of my social medias, and you can also check the link in the description below to get some fun merch. Also, thank you to all of my beautiful patrons. We have a new tier on my Patreon that gets you some exclusive merch and some fun little stuff from me. So go check that out if you are able. And yeah, that's all I have for you today. Stan Raja O'Hara, Stan Kylie Sonique Love, Stan Curia C. Davenport, and all the rest of the bitches on this cast. Okay, I think that's everything. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you all in the next one.